Welcome back to the Anti-Meta Club. I am very happy to report that this week's Race C is actually Group 3 again, and not only that, there's a required pit stop. Let's get into it. I think Group 3 is probably the closest class right now when it comes to the Bape, but the addition of a few different tuning options brings it even closer this time around. Lexus isn't usually a frontrunner, but this time it can actually put up a fight against any other car in the category, so that's why I chose it for this week's Anti-Meta car. I was able to get a 137.3, which as of Monday night was 20th globally. I actually think that there are at least a couple tenths left in this thing. When we look at the leaderboard, we can see that there are a lot of cars available in the top 100, but I think the Porsche, Genesis, and GTR are really prevalent everywhere on the top 100. Credit goes to our friend Cooper for providing the tune. I absolutely love the way this feels. It is a lot more stable than stock. You can rotate it with the throttle, and it's really good on the tires as well. The front straight is so long, it's easy to lose your place on it, so make sure you're taking a lot of mental notes about different references that you see. If we're able to keep an eye on the left side of the track, when it kinks right here, we know we're about to brake. For the time trial, we can see this dark spot on the ground right before the curbing starts, and that's when I like to hit the brakes. I like to start turning in second gear right before the 50 meter board. Braking heavily, downshift to first, trail brake in, and try to get your right tires up on the red and white part of the curb right here. Back up to second before you squeeze on the throttle, and you do not want to go past the red and white part of the curbing on the exit. Due to the slope and the material, it's going to suck you all the way off track. Stay tight on the exit and get yourself to the right side of the track looking for the next set of meter boards. Looking for the red dot on the fence, we're going to brake right before we get that and turn in right before the 50 meter board. Downshift to third and only brake enough so that you can get real close to the bollard on the inside without hitting it. You want to get on the throttle early and it's going to look like you're going to go off track, but you can go extremely wide off track as long as your left tires don't go over the red and white and you're back on the pavement before the end of the red and white part of the curbing ends. You really only need the left tires back on the pavement too, so as soon as they're there, start turning in to match the curve of the next corner. Right before you get to this next little paved trail on the right, we're going to start lifting and again trying to match the curve of the corner. The curve changes just a little bit. It tightens up and almost flattens out right in the center, and then it maintains the same curve as the entry point on the other side. If you look up at the mini map, you can see it's a bit of a U shape, so your goal is to apex again at the beginning of the curve on the other side of the U shape. With a tight enough entry, you won't need to touch the brakes whatsoever. We just stay in third gear and we manipulate the throttle to make sure that we're staying close while also keeping up a lot of speed. Your goal is to make sure that you're never more than half the width of the track away from the inside. When you look up here on the fence, you can see another one of the red or orange dots, and right there we're going to start braking. Continue braking and steering towards the inside, looking for the 50 meter board on the right. That is when we're going to start turning in. Dropping down to first gear after you've turned in can help the car continue to decelerate towards the apex, and then you can get off the brakes really quickly. Make sure you're only using the red and white part of that inside curbing, and then of course try to go all the way out to the red and white part of the exit curbing. Once again, you only need the left tires on the red and white. As long as you get all the way back on the pavement before the end of the red and white, you'll be totally fine without dirty tires. Stay tight to the inside and clip the curbing at the two little kinks right here, then track out when you see the Dunlop sign in the distance. There's a bit of a tiny paved road that I like to use for braking, but it's hard to see, so what I like to do is as soon as I get completely past the Dunlop sign, that's when I start braking. Brake in a completely straight line, get down to second gear, and look at the inside barrier for where it says Dunlop. That is when we're going to start turning in, and we're going to, of course, get down to first gear to completely rotate the car, trying to put just the left tires on the red and white part of the curbing here. Staying in first gear, accelerate, and continue turning until you're faced once again with the Dunlop sign directly in front of us. That's where we're going to start turning in and lifting, using the opportunity to shift up to second gear before getting back on the throttle, trying to go straight at this bollard. Get as close as you can without hitting it, and then start looking for the curbing on the outside of the track. Lift off the throttle right before you get to the green part beyond the red and white curbing, and then add a little bit of brakes just so we can slow down enough to look for the next inside curb. This time we want to go all the way up on the green right next to the bollard and go straight over this corner. The elevation dips down right after this corner, so you've got to be really careful to not understeer. If you can induce oversteer on purpose, then go for it. If you're not comfortable with that, you'll just have to be very patient. Once again, we only need the right tires on the curbing, but beyond that, it gets really slippery. Coming off the curbing, we want to start lifting off the throttle to try to match the shape, and then at the end of it, we're going to start adding brakes. As soon as you feel you're going slow enough, downshift to first gear and start trying to aim for the other side of the bollard. If you're using this view, you probably can't see the exit just yet, so use the hotel in the distance to judge when you should get on the throttle, and once again, you want to use as much of the exit curbing as you possibly can. Aiming just to the left of the shack in the distance where the marshals are, we want to start lining up with the outside of the track as early as we possibly can. Right before you get to this line that's just beyond the curbing, we want to start downshifting to second and then braking very, very gently. I next look for this thick white line, and that's when I know that I need to downshift to first gear, scrub off as much speed as I can, and then get completely off the brakes as I turn in. By the end of the curb on the left, we should be fully off the brakes and ready to get up into second gear and back on the throttle. You can use more of the inside curb, but I really wanted to make sure I didn't slide whatsoever, and I wanted to get on the throttle fully so I can go all the way up on this weird part of the curbing. There is a really weird elevation thing between the green and the red and white part, but as long as your wheels aren't turned too much and you're not sliding at all, you're going to be totally fine. If you've made it this far, hopefully you don't get too excited and you can remember to shift. I have definitely missed a shift after nailing a really good lap, and you do not want to do that. I mentioned in the breakdown how easy it is to kind of lose where you are on track because of how long the straight is. If you've got a lot of traffic on the inside, look for that big light post that's on the inside to know when you should hit the brakes. If you completely miss the curbing here, you're actually missing out on an opportunity for your car to rotate. Dodge Lamb says that that is the rotation station, and I have never forgotten his words. The braking and turn in for this is very, very difficult. It's an incredibly quick process, but the general idea is you want to keep as much speed as you can and make sure that you widen that curve as much as you can too. You should be able to do this corner without actually touching the brakes. In the race, it's going to be a different story, but you should just be able to do it with modulating the throttle in time trial. Anytime you're coming out of a corner in second gear, you can use the throttle to rotate just a little bit, but of course, if that turns into a drift, you're just going to lose momentum. So you'll want to experiment with that and just kind of practice. This is a really good car to practice that skill in general. You've got to be really brave on the brakes here, and you can continue braking all the way to the apex, so you might be able to go deeper than you think. As you're learning the sector, I would suggest prioritizing this left-hand turn with the second gear exit. Because of the elevation changes, it's really easy to slide your car, and once again, if you're comfortable doing it with the throttle getting a little bit of oversteer on exit, that could help, but of course, it's really easy to get too loose. I wouldn't really suggest it here because you're going to have to try to correct the car when you're almost entirely off the track. In the final corner, obviously, the most important thing here is getting on the throttle as early as you can because it leads to the biggest straight in the entire world. That's probably not true, but it's incredibly long, so of course, make sure you are absolutely getting on the throttle as early as you possibly can for this one. And once again, I am imploring you to make sure that you do not miss your shifts. That will ruin everything. I'm not sure exactly what was going on my Monday stream, but I was incredibly pleased to have won 3 different slots and gotten a podium on a 4th race. I won't quite spoil the end of this race yet, but we're starting in 12th place, and Fuji is an absolutely wild track. We've got the longest straight that I've ever seen in my entire life. Again, that's hyperbole, but it's an incredibly long straight, and then you've got to get down to first gear for rotation on turn 1. So just like Monza, just like Spa, it can be really, really crazy. A lot of different cars work, and I actually don't know what the meta car is. I would say probably the Genesis. I heard the Genesis can easily do 37s in the race, but there are so many different cars, it was really hard to tell what the meta was going to be, and that's really cool. A lot of the cars don't need to take tires. Every car has to do a pit stop, but you don't have to do anything in the pit stop. It's almost like a Joker lap. But some cars are going to need tires. The Ferrari, for instance, is absolutely not even worth driving in this race. Even if you take tires, the tires are still going to be crazy by the end of the race. Now, I know I mentioned how crazy turn 1 was going to be, but in reality, the rest of the lap was really crazy. Turn 1 ended up totally fine. You really love to see it. It's actually really cool when you get a public lobby, especially in Gran Turismo, with so many different levels, so many different DR ranks, and everyone's really clean on the first really scary corner. It's usually a good sign, but all things got to come to an end. Before we get into the craziness, I'd like to demonstrate that you can actually go too wide through that corner safely and without losing too much pace. As long as you just try, you can usually go too wide in almost any corner. I really like when traffic bunches up on this really tight left-hander because you can brake super deep considering the fact that everyone has to slow down a lot, and as I talked about before, you can use a little bit of throttle oversteer without losing any pace. That's why I absolutely love using this car. Now the second big choke point is this incredibly tight right-hander, and pretty much all of Sector 3 can be in itself a choke point because there are so many different, like I mentioned before, so many different levels of drivers here. Everyone's going to have different pace, and with that, I just lucked out so much with the ghosting. We're already in 7th place. At this point, it looked like it was the most perfect anti-meta situation I could possibly be in. There's a Porsche in front, Porsche behind, and the supposed meta car, the Genesis, was going to be right there before the straight, but unfortunately, he got a little squirrely, and I was able to get in front of him before the straight. I say it's unfortunate. It's actually pretty fortunate, but I wanted to show off the fact that this car can pass the Genesis on the straight. The Porsche in general is known for having a really low top speed, but it has fantastic acceleration. We're only a half second behind it as we get on the front straight, but I was really surprised by the fact that we weren't right up on its tail halfway through. In fact, this isn't even really going to be an overtaking opportunity, and he didn't even have slipstream. It's because of this that you're going to see a lot of Porsches in the races and probably even on the leaderboard too, but I don't think it's quite as good as the Genesis. I think the Genesis just has that raw pace, that raw speed, which really makes it the meta card this week. Now, as we're getting closer to this guy, I was firstly impressed by the fact that the Porsche didn't need to defend going into that first corner. We were only a half second behind him going on the straight, and I definitely knew that the Porsche was able to handle the curves a lot better than the Lexus could, or at least it should be able to, but I don't quite think this guy had his lines down, as you can see. I feel it's pretty rare in this series, but I feel recently that I've shown more of these incidents. I don't believe the guy in front was clean when it came to defending and driving against me, and I'll explain more as it's happening. He moved twice as I went for the inside move, and still it wasn't that egregious because he technically moved before he needed to brake, so it wasn't really moving in the braking zone. When I was able to sneak past and get this, he started turning in much too early and trying to block my car with his car. I thought, okay, maybe he turned in early. He was just trying to do whatever he could to stay close. It's okay. He hasn't hit me yet. He's clean here. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt, and I just took a tight line going into the final corner to avoid anything, and he went directly into me. Now, if that kind of thing happens, mistakes like that can happen, but don't use that as an opportunity to then try to pass the person. He's directly next to me right now, and the fact of the matter is, if he did not run directly into me, he wouldn't have the opportunity to be next to me. He might be able to use slipstream and get next to me after we're on the straight, but the only reason he's directly next to me is because he hit me, slowing me down enough that he was then able to take advantage of it. Not only that, he's aggressively defending, completely parking on the apex, so if he's willing to go slightly dirty, then so am I. I wasn't about to put him into a wall, but I'm definitely going to put him on the slippery stuff if he's going to do that kind of thing. I am, as always, interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on that, but again, if you're willing to hit me and then try to take that opportunity to pass me and then defend aggressively, then I'm going to have to play at your level, and that's what I did. As the last word of my defense of my actions, we jumped to the end of that same lap, and I'm already 1.2 seconds ahead of him. I think it's very clear that the only way he was ever going to pass me was by pushing me out of the way, and we're just not going to have that. Jumping forward again 2 laps, we have finally almost caught up to King Ghidorah. Now that we're about to catch up to him, it's the perfect time to discuss the actual strategy for the race. Since 1 pit stop is required, but nothing is actually required within the pit stop, and the Lexus has good enough tire wear that you don't need to change the tires, really the timing of when you go into the pits is the only thing you need to consider. Starting in 12th place, the initial plan was just to go into the pits on the very first lap. Chances are not a lot of people would be doing that, and if they were probably just the other people who are faster drivers starting from the back with me. Most people who are up front are going to want to wait until the end of the race to go into the pits because if they go in early, they're going to risk running into the traffic from the people from behind. Since there weren't a lot of people around me and a lot of the people behind had already taken their pit stop, it would have been a safe idea for me to take a pit stop instead of battling King Ghidorah, but it looked like he actually had that exact same idea. After leading for most of the race, I was able to catch up to him pretty quickly, so he knew that my pace was going to be better overall. If he's able to get out of the pits without having to battle me, there's a chance that something could happen to me, and he'd be able to have even more clean laps and potentially stay out in front. Now, the previous lead that I had was a little bit deceptive because we don't know who was behind us and who had already pit, or if they had clean air the entire time. So when we go in at the second to last lap, coming out, we're not sure what to expect, and we can see that El Giron, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, is only 2.4 seconds behind. Though that is a big enough gap that I don't really have to worry about him catching me. The worst case scenario, he'd be very fast and he would have taken tires, which might have helped him hunt me down. But 2.4 seconds is an incredibly long time, or a long distance to make up, especially just with a single lap left. In this race, I really lucked out. Not only did I get past most of the traffic right at the beginning on the very first lap, but a lot of the people who could have beaten me ended up either in traffic or getting spun out and needing to quit. If you are, I'd say, in the bottom 4 or 5 drivers at the end of the first lap, go into the pits. If you find yourself going into an early pit stop, but there are aggressive drivers or people who may be slightly slower or just your speed directly in front of you, it's probably still safe just to go in on the second or third lap, hoping that they don't get clean air and you do. If your pace or luck is good enough that you can get really close to the front at the end of the first lap, then definitely avoid going into the pits just then. But with that said, knowing the different conditions that would make you change your mind are really important. So again, if there are people who are really fast who are going into the pits and you had been thinking about going into the pits, you might want to avoid them because you might just get stuck in their dirty air. But that little joker lap is enough variety to make strategy actually a little bit important, but it's the kind of thing that you can change up at any time. As always, thank you very much for watching my video. If you like what you saw, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll be making a new one of these guides every week. Thank you.